Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ether Hub. Today I am joined by a very special guest, my very own Dungeon Master on tap, Jordan with a PH. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me over here on the cross pollination platform. We were
Oh,
just talking about how if Wizards of the Coast was a big store, all of the Magic the Gathering kids are on one side and all of the D&D kids seem to be on the other side, and we need to merge those. So
absolutely. There's no favoritism here today. We're coming together at the
yeah,
same game table because
love it.
we're trying to learn a little bit about the D&D universe that's colliding with Magic the Gathering right now with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. It's a big crossover.
Yeah,
There's a lot of MTG fans that might be a little bit tangentially involved in D&D, but maybe are stepping a little too light on it. I'm gonna see if I can push them into the world of D&D a little bit because it's really some fascinating lore to mine from this content here.
yeah. Yeah, and if you like lore, I mean, there's so much, and like you could
Absolutely.
just, I mean, I've made a career out of it. Well, I wouldn't say career, but I've made a hobby out of it.
Same. I have a hobby on MTG lore, so I think we can bring a little bit of our perspectives together and hopefully give you guys a little bit of entertaining look at both D&D and MTG lore combined in this set. So let's get started. I have a question for you.
Yes.
So we kind of have an idea of how Magic the Gathering kind of likes to tell its stories through written articles, novels, that sort of thing. How would you say is the best way that you can describe that D&D tells its story to its fan base?
Well, so mostly I would say through adventures. That's probably the big one. So the company before Wizards had the company, TSR had the company. It's their TSR made D&D. Gary Gygax is the guy behind it, and he had a campaign setting that he was like basically playtesting the rules with, and it was called Greyhawk. And when they his intention, I think, when they were releasing Dungeons and Dragons was that everybody would kind of make their own world. But then people were kind of like, well, is there like a master world? Like, what's that all about? And they were like, oh, well, I got this Greyhawk world. So they started making these stories in Greyhawk about just all of the things that happen. And it started basically with well, we have a castle. It's called Castle Greyhawk. And then I don't know, over there's some more stuff. And then over there, oh yeah, and there's other characters. And a lot of these planeswalkers that are in this set, like Mordenkainen, I actually don't know if you have any others that are part of that, were Gary Gygax's kids' characters. Like
Oh,
Mordenkainen, I think might have been Gary Gygax's. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't actually know for sure. But like a lot of those characters were part of that core
interesting.
group. And so those public or those names that you see, like iconic names, like there's a spell called Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Well, Tasha was a
Yeah.
character from those Greyhawk campaigns. Not that she was a villain, not necessarily played by a person, but Tensor's floating disc is another spell, and Tensor was a wizard, and so it was kind of this like when you became a powerful enough wizard within the game, you would make your own spells, and
Okay.
that is a tradition that I have kept alive. So I played a character named Joshe, and I created Joshe's conjured weapon, where I could like conjure big hammers and like hit people with them, and then they disappear. And it was like it's just I don't know, like a rite of passage. Like you got to make your own spells eventually when you're
Yeah.
playing D and
So
D.
so it sounds like Adventures in the Forgotten Realms has a lot of nods to significant characters in
Yeah.
the D&D world, correct?
Yeah. So,
And
well, so Forgotten Realms in general is just so big. And they also wanted Forgotten Realms to kind of be a hub for all of these other settings. So you do have Mordenkainen coming over from Greyhawk to Forgotten Realms, or he might wind up in another realm all differently. Who knows? But yeah. So
so
lots
in
of
that
running around.
in that sense, Mordenkainen going from one world to
Mhm.
another, from Faerun to somewhere else,
Mhm.
that sounds like to me you're describing a planeswalker in
Yeah,
a sense,
yeah,
right?
I would 100% say it because they released a Curse of Strahd, and Curse of Strahd takes place that's an adventure, and that takes place in a completely different plane of existence, called Ravenloft. And in that adventure, you actually run into Mordenkainen. And he's just living in Ravenloft, kind of like trying to get out, confused, like doesn't know what's going on. But that's the whole thing, is like he does traverse those different planes of existence. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to see that these Planeswalker cards made for the set are at least loosely tied to characters who can jump from world to world. That at least is the essence of a Planeswalker in MTG. But speaking of those characters, outside of the ones that you just mentioned for the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set, what are some of the more famous characters in Dungeons and Dragons?
It's funny because all of the famous characters are probably going to come from the comic books, and they're going to come from the novels. There are a handful of background characters that they don't have a lot of stories about them. Volo is one. So Volo was, he was a famed explorer and ran around, and back in the I think late 80s, early 90s, they made a lot of like Volo's Guide to Jungles. And it was like, the idea was that Volo went exploring through the Forgotten Realms and came back and wrote a book and gave it to you. So it was like, oh, Volo's Guide to the City of Waterdeep, or Volo's Guide to this. And so they kept that going with the current edition of D&D by introducing a book called Volo's Guide to Monsters, which was just like a big expansion of monsters. He's obviously one, but the big one would probably be Drizzt and the Companions of the Hall, which would be R.A. Salvatore's characters from the Crystal Shard books that he made. And so he started writing this book called The Crystal Shard, and then this dark elf, this drow, became kind of the central figure. And I think it's like 30 books running now and still going. So Drizzt is probably the most popular, and I may be saying, well, there's no canonical way of saying his name because it's Drizzt. And I say Drizzt. Yeah. Some people say Drizzit, and I get a lot of flack for saying it incorrectly, but if I said it the other way, I would get the same amount of flack for saying it incorrectly. So I just...
Well, believe me, I was looking at the cards. Drizzt is in there, and I always want to say Drizzit because there is a term in Magic the Gathering called Is It? I'm just like, hey, Is It? Drizzit? Yeah, it's close enough, you know? But yeah, all those characters that you just mentioned are also the appear on cards in this set. Volo, Drizzt,
Wolfgar, Bruno Battlehammer, Caddy Bree.
Yep.
Is she in there?
Caddy Bree, she's in here. She's in here. So so all those characters are at least getting nods in this Magic the Gathering crossover. It kind of makes sense taking some of the more popular characters. I believe those are the characters involved in the Dark Alliance game that just released, right?
Yeah. So they're probably the most well known, which is why I think they put them in the Dark Alliance game.
Definitely.
I've played it a little bit, but I haven't played it a ton. Apparently, that Dark Alliance game hints back to some like really early lore, which was kind of cool. So I do need to play it at some point so I know the changes that they're making. But
Magic the Gathering had their luck with an RPG recently that wasn't too successful. But we can move on from that. I don't need to. But so let me ask you another question. So in Magic the Gathering's storytelling and its lore, the player themselves has gone through kind of an evolution. You know, we were a part of the story every time we played a game in a sense because we took on the role of a planeswalker. We were the planeswalker who was able to summon monsters and use mana at our fingertips to cast spells at our opponents, and
so not someone you're playing, but literally like Cybin is.
Yes, I was a planeswalker in an epic duel with my opponent who was a planeswalker and also 14 years old and also kicking my butt. So that was kind of like the theme whenever you played a game. That has kind of changed. I'm not even sure what it's supposed to be now. I think it's just people getting angry at each other who don't tap their land the way they want you to. But what is that something that happens in D&D at all? Like, I know you guys play characters in a campaign. Is that like one of the best ways that you can form a story?
Well, I mean, you have the Dungeon Master. He's kind of forming the story. And then, you have just generic characters that you're making. A lot of people start at level 1. And so you're like, I'm going to play a dwarf cleric who worships Bahamut. Yeah, so you're like, I'm a dwarf cleric, and then you evolve. And earlier D&D, it was very common that even the Dungeon Master had a character. And that, if you were running a game, your character wasn't necessarily there, but you would go down to the hobby shop and you would buy like a level 3 adventure. You're like, oh, my friends, they're level 3. I have this level 3 adventure and we'll run it. And it would take you like 2 weeks, maybe like a 2 or 3 sessions to get through it. And then all of a sudden your character's level 4. And then it would be the next person's turn to run something. And so then that dungeon master could play his character. And you got experience points based on finishing adventures, killing monsters, and collecting gold. Nowadays, it's very common to jump characters more often. Like before it was like, okay, I am, Sorcerer Jorphdan, and I only have this character, and I take him wherever I go to any type of convention or something, or not convention, but like any type of game. But now it's like, oh, you're running what game? Oh, a level 4 game? Okay, cool. And it's set here. Okay, I'm gonna make a new character just for that. And then you sit down and you play through that adventure with your new character, and you might never play that character again. Like, it's like, okay, that story's done. That character goes off into retirement, or he might come out of retirement for something. I feel like the celebrity DMs do a really good job, like the Acquisitions Incorporated people and the Critical Role Vox Machina people. They do a very good job of saying, well, this is our character and we kind of play this. And so they would take the same character from campaign to campaign, but the majority of people I know, they're always doing different characters. So
yeah, it's really cool to see the difference, because Magic the Gathering, obviously the games are one-off. You play until someone loses and then move on, sort of thing. And then D&D is obviously this much more involved, expansive, elongated story where you're a part of it and you're building it. Magic the Gathering, its story by comparison is very static. We're not involved in the story in any real significant way. We play with cards and we play with characters that are in the story, but we don't dictate how that story is going to end. Much like, unlike D&D, where the story can evolve depending on what your characters do. If someone rolls a natural 1, for example, something can change very drastically from a situation like that. So you can see how the storytelling elements are changed depending on the type of game that you're playing here.
Yeah, and it's kind of like if you've ever met a stranger, but you find out that you've both read the same book or you've both watched the same movie. I've gone to conventions, and then you'll hear somebody talking about like, oh yeah, I was in the Tomb of Horrors, and like I stepped on a trap and bees killed me. And then you're like, oh, when I got to that part, we actually did this. And he's like, I should have thought of that. And you have these weird connected memories, even though you've never met this person, because they've played the same module, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
So,
well, that brings me to another great point that I wanted to get your opinion on. I wanted to see some personal, stories come out of you from this. But what have been some of your biggest or most significant stories that have come out of a D&D campaign from you? Either like the adventure itself or something that you've done with your play group. Just name off some impactful stories that have.
Oh man, impactful stories. So the Tomb of Horrors is a classic. It's a classic setting, or not setting, but module. And Gary Gygax eventually he wrote that module to kill his unkillable players. He was really upset that they were surviving all the time. So it's not friendly. It's really terrible, and it's run by Acererak, who I believe is also in the set for this, the Lich person Acererak.
Yep.
And so Acererak created liches in Dungeons & Dragons. They need to have they have a phylactery that they have to siphon souls into in order to keep their immortality. And the Tomb of Horrors is this giant tomb designed to kill adventurers that then siphon all of those souls to keep him alive.
I
and
see.
There's supposedly untold riches in there, which keeps new adventurers coming in all the time. And within the world of D&D, it's kind of a rite of passage to play it at least one time and be like, wait, what? What? And there's a lot of crazy things. I have the unique experience where we were playing, I was running the Tomb of Horrors for the first time, and the very end, you get to Acererak, and there's like a bunch of treasures everywhere, and there's all kinds of crazy traps. And my players did what I consider the impossible, and they went in creating a magic circle that would keep evil things within it. So before they touched any of the treasure, which kind of like activates a Serac skull to come, this demi-lich to come flying at you, they created this like careful trap, and then they like grabbed a bunch of it, and he jumped up and was just like banging along the inside of this cylinder because he couldn't get out. And we went over the rules like a dozen times, and we're just like, how is this possible?
And it worked.
Yeah, and it worked. And I was able to do well, and that's one of the things. Like you talk about Magic the Gathering, it's so like we gotta carefully read this card because how does it actually influence the game? And that's the same thing with D&D. We had to be like, well, what does this really mean? And by the rules written, it does seem to think that you're going to like this lich can't get out of this thing for whatever reason.
Oh man, that's hilarious. That's
most things like that always come down to a roll. And we did have D&D has concentration checks where you're like trying to maintain a magical energy, and it came down to this one roll where I'm like, okay, if you roll a 10 or higher, then you maintain concentration. And like we rolled, and he succeeded, and it was like that was one where everyone's standing at the table like leaning over, and you see the die, and it's like and yeah. So they were able to escape with untold riches, and Serac was very upset.
So tell me, as a DM, do you feel like you're at war with your playgroup, or that you're just trying to lead them on a journey? How do you recognize that dynamic between DM and playgroup?
Yeah, they call them there's like DMing, and then they say like there's adversarial DMs, where you are like out to punish your players. And I have never been one to want to punish my players. And in fact, when I first started DMing, I was scared that maybe my friends wouldn't like me if I killed their character. But then through play, I realized that if the sense of danger and death is not there, then they're not having fun and they're not taking it seriously. And since then, I've had lots of character deaths. But players usually... Well, so to answer your question, I'm not adversarial. I want to help them. I want them to succeed. And I think that a lot of DMs, when your players do succeed, you're almost proud of them. You're like, you guys did it. That's so cool. And that's just one of the fun aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. So
I'm gonna ask a pretty personal question here. I don't want to blow up your personality or anything like that, but be honest. Has there ever been a time where you had a small grin on your face when something bad happened to a player in your playgroup?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. Like
something that gave you just a little bit of satisfaction.
I think anytime that I have a trap go off that they didn't think about, I had well, actually, this is sorry. I just keep thinking about the Tomb of Horrors, but I stole a trap from that for another campaign that I was running. And the idea was that they go into a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway is a man chained to a wall. And as you walk forward, the chains tighten, and he cries out in pain. Well, the whole thing is an illusion, but it's a very intelligent illusion, and it will talk back to you and stuff. So they have to get to the end of this hallway, but they're going to rip this guy into like 4 pieces if they do. And that was an entire 2-hour game session where they like we started with them walking in, and then they were just like, wait, what's going on? And so by the end of that, my players were a little frustrated that they spent all like session trying to protect an illusion, and they were very clever about it. They did a bunch of different things to try and like solve the puzzle. And that gave me a grin because it was just fun to watch them interact, and you're like, oh, you don't know what's happening. And so, yeah.
That sounds like pure torture to me. Not just because like you're actually torturing, well, they thought they were torturing somebody, but the fact that this whole trap was set up to be a mental misstep in the first place while you're preying on their morality, so to speak. Was there any player that was like, let's just rip him in half and move on?
No, I think there was, I have one player that was very much like, well, I'm just walking forward, but the rest of them were holding her back. And they're like, you can't do that and stuff. And so it was a lot of like party dynamics interaction and stuff, and it's fun. And when everyone's really in character and like, I think I would just walk forward, and they're like, okay, well then I think I would stop you. It's a lot of fun.
That is so cool how you can bring in a lot of different personalities, and you get to see where people's priorities lay a little bit when they're in a fantasy setting. So, hey, I think this is a great place where you can just wrap up with one final question.
Okay.
With Magic the Gathering and D&D kind of coming together in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, obviously they've stated that it's not canonical to the MTG story, but there are a lot of material out there where D&D is using Magic the Gathering as a play setting for a lot of people. But I want to get your opinion on, do you think the multiverses of D&D and MTG could work well together if they were to be properly fused together?
Uh, there's so much history that says that they shouldn't be fused together in a way,
Mm-hmm.
like because we have they call it the Great Wheel in D&D, and it's like all of these different planes, and the prime material plane is at the center, and that's where Faerun is and a bunch of other planets, where like Ravnica would be on the prime material plane, kind of a thing. I think yes, because ultimately every dungeon master that I know throws the stuff out they don't like. So if we give you like, or if Wizards of the Coast says all of these worlds are now opened up and you could have games on all of these different planets and things like that, that's just more lore and more interesting tidbits and more NPCs, non-player characters that your DM can read about and say, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to have this head lady from Ravnica come in and she's going to be my villain for this because I like the way she talks, or I read a short story about her and it's really cool. And I think that's awesome. So I do think that they can work together. I don't know if Wizards will ever do that, like officially say on our big map of the worlds, here's, Magic the Gathering in the corner. But
Yeah.
We'll see.
And you know what? Honestly, I don't think they're ever going to take that plunge, but I will say that D&D has so much amazing lore and storytelling just from the novels and adventure guides and all the worlds that they've spent decades building, that I would not mind us exploring these stories in Magic the Gathering sets moving forward. I think there's so much amazing artwork and card design and mechanics that have been pulled from adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
The dungeon delving mechanic I thought was really
Exactly.
cool. Like it's so
all
fun.
that stuff.
Yeah.
It's so unique and fun. It might not be everybody or every player's cup of tea, but this is exactly the kind of set that I personally love. Something that has taken a lot of inspiration from the flavor of whatever inspired it, whether it be Theros with Greek mythology or Ravnica with like some hex tech stuff. I think it's really, really great when an IP can incorporate those of another fantasy into their own and still make it fundamentally Magic the Gathering. And I think that's I think as a card game, it's always been able to successfully pull it off. And like I said, not everybody's cup of tea, but I would love to see more of this stuff, specifically with D&D's history.
Yeah, no, I think, this card, I'm sold on this card set just because of my background, but like, I think it would be really cool to do more stuff like this, so.
Absolutely, and all else fails, the art has been stunning on it so far. Like, really all the art that's come out for the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms has just blown me off my seat.
There's like, I'm just thinking, like,
there's always that.
Asmodeus, and he's like sitting on his throne, like the devil god, or so cool.
Oh, yeah, a lot of new artwork for DMs to use if they so choose, for sure. All right, well, before we go here, why don't you let my fans know where they can catch you if they want to dive into some D&D lore, because your channel is all about that, right?
All about, yes. So I have a YouTube channel, and you can follow or subscribe there. It's youtube.com/Jordan, but there's a PH in the middle, so it's JORPHDAN, because I'm Jordan with a silent PH. I'm actually Jordan with a silent PH on all the social medias, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and I don't have TikTok. I don't want one, but I have all the others, so you can find me there. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter.
Oh man.
But yeah, and on my YouTube channel, I have a bunch of playlists. So if you're interested in Forgotten Realms lore, there's a playlist. If you're interested in some of the other worlds of D&D and how they all incorporate into the Forgotten Realms, I have an Eberron playlist and a Planescape playlist and all these other ones. So you can kind of just explore and see what campaign setting is right for you.
All right, cool. If you guys are interested in D&D anything fantasy lore related, go ahead, check out his channel. I really, really suggest it, guys. I started watching his content probably like 3 years ago before this crossover was even announced. So I've been a fan of his channel for a while now. I'm sure you guys will get it, find some enjoying content from there as well. So, but until next time, guys, this is all we have for today, and see ya.
Bye.